Good morning and welcome everyone to our webinar called Heroic Leadership and Emotional Intelligence. My name is David Cory with the Emotional Intelligence Training Company, and we're here to illuminate more about this relationship between the notion of heroic leadership and emotional intelligence. Now, if you've got a question or a comment, please feel free to use the chat box. I've got the Q&A turned off for this webinar, and so all questions and comments will be coming to me through the chat box. So please use it and type in your questions or your comments in there, and we'll get started. So, why heroic leadership? Well, let me tell you about that. It was many years ago that I learned about this notion called the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell. He wrote about it extensively in looking at and understanding more about the storylines that is found within many religions and throughout early mythology. And I think it's fascinating how this has informed our culture and our societies. And so it's important that we look at it with a critical eye and understand more about how it can help us, and maybe how it can hold us back from evolving as we're meant to do. So we're going to look at that and talk about that, and look at particularly this relationship with the notion of EQ. Then we're going to talk about what do we want to take away from this discussion, and then we'll have a question and answer period. So I plan to talk until 1/2 so for 30 minutes, and then open it up to questions. But if you have a question at any time, please feel free to use the chat box and type in your questions or your comments there. All right, so let's begin and dive into this issue by defining what we mean by hero. Well, one definition is that this is a person who is admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. For example, a war hero. Some synonyms that we might use for hero would be a brave person, a lion heart, a warrior, a knight, a champion, a victor, a conqueror even. Now, there's one other definition of hero that we might want to take into consideration, and that is that in North America, it's sometimes used as another term for a submarine sandwich. Not sure what that has to do with anything, just worth noting, and that has something to do with my sense of humor. In any case, we want to look at what is meant by this hero and why this hero has taken on such importance in our society. And to do that, we want to look at and understand more, as I mentioned, about the work of Joseph Campbell. So who was Joseph Campbell, and why is his work important? So Joseph Campbell lived from 1904 to 1987. He was an American mythologist, writer, lecturer, and he's best known for his work in comparative mythology and comparative religion. He introduced the notion of the monomyth, that is, that there is one great myth which has much in common, looking at all narratives regardless of their origin, and not to suggest, of course, because I don't want to insult anyone's religion, that religion is myth, but he did talk about the similarities that many of the what we now call Greek mythology has also to do with stories from various religions around the world, and maybe also informed by other great works by individuals throughout history. So this is interesting, that there might be one single great story, and he's got this archetypal pattern, which we're going to take a look at, which is often described as the hero's journey, which he described in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which was written in 1949. So let's take a look at this archetypal pattern, this cycle that Campbell spent his life writing about. And if you type in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey into Google, you'll get many, many different images, many different different perspectives on this hero's journey, and that all look different, but they all have many similarities that Campbell identified in his writing. So they generally all start with the call to adventure. So as you can see here in this particular depiction, the hero starts off in a mundane situation of normality, from which some information is received that acts as a call to head off into the unknown. And you may recall from certainly some of the Lord of the Ring movies. I remember one where I think it's Bilbo Baggins, where all of a sudden there is this call to adventure. And what does he do? Well, let's go to step number 2 there. He refuses the call. It's like, no, 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 no. I am not going on this great adventure. I'm quite happy here in the Shire. You go on without me. And there may be this sense of duty or obligation, but there's also this fear, insecurity, sense of inadequacy, etc., that results in the refusal of the call. And then as we go around, you can see that there's this idea of supernatural aid, that there's some sort of magical helper appears. It could be an animal, could be a human, could be, you know, could be a superhero or some other supernatural aid. And this idea of crossing the first threshold. There are actually a couple of thresholds here to cross. Then there's this idea of going into the belly of the whale, and there's the road of trials, meeting with the goddess. I don't know why that is usually some sort of female character. Interesting, by the way, Joseph Campbell believed that women did not go on a hero's journey. They were simply there as supporters, and of course this is easily explained or understood through gender socialization and how women were seen in the 40s at the time. Then there's the temptation. Then there's this atonement with some sort of father figure. Then there's this idea of apostasis and the ultimate boon. And you can see all of that, and you can certainly read more about this. This is not so much about Campbell's The Hero's Journey and this idea of the monomyth as it is about what it has implied, or what it has, or the impact that it has had on our thoughts and our beliefs about leadership, and about who leaders should be and how they should be. In our organizations and in our societies. So this is one depiction of the hero's journey, and as I mentioned, there are others. So let's take a look now at another depiction. So as the previous one went in counterclockwise order, this one goes in clockwise order. So here we have what is called the ordinary world. So things are loosely similar. The wording of some of these things might be slightly different, but many different people have looked at this and have sort of put their own names to the various stages or the various phases that are to be gone through. And as you can see, they've reversed the order, they've divided it up into various component parts. Much of it staying true to the original work of Joseph Campbell. Some may be feeling like they're moderately improving the view of Joseph Campbell. So it's interesting to think about and take a look at these different depictions, and certainly to take a look at the different phases and stages, and to realize how much they have informed many fictional stories that that become part of our popular culture by way of movies and television shows. You'll often see many of these phases or stages in the protagonist or the main character of a fictional story. They've taken on the hero's journey, and we are fascinated and interested in that journey for all that it entails. And so we want to look at what's good about this, and we also want to look at what might not be so great about it. That is to take a critical look at it and understand that it may not be all good. that we don't want everyone going off on a hero's journey necessarily. And we'll talk about why we think that that might actually be. So here's another depiction. This is the third and final depiction that I'll show you. As I mentioned, there are dozens of depictions of the hero's journey online. You can go take a look at all of them. And certainly you can go back and read Joseph Campbell's book that he wrote in 1949 to understand more about what he thought about these various stages and his analysis of them. So here you see another depiction that moves in clockwise fashion. You can see at the bottom that this was done by a company called Clever Prototypes, and certainly it has a bit more of a graphical design element to it, and in terms of the phases or stages. So they've divided it up into part one, which they call the call to adventure, part two, the supreme ordeal / initiation, part three, the unification or the transformation, and part four, the road back, the hero's return. So in each case, the hero returns to the place where they started, but they're different. They've been changed by the journey. And certainly there's a lot that is true about this hero's journey. There's a lot of interesting connections to be made and understandings to be had, but we want to look at it from more of a critical eye and think about and consider what might be the possible downsides of the implications of the hero's journey. So let's think about that now. Some critical writers have talked about this as the monomyth. You saw that Joseph Campbell himself used the term monomyth, and some have said, well, it's actually more like the manomyth. And as I mentioned, Joseph Campbell himself believed that women did not have a hero's journey, did not go on a hero's journey. So that's interesting right there in terms of our changing society and our better understanding of of the limitations of gender socialization, and the idea that in fact biological determinism is pretty much a thing of the past, although some people still believe in that. So basically our critique begins with the assumption that we are evolving as a society, we are evolving as a species, and part of that is the evolution from a more traditional way of being, which involved certain skills, certain qualities, certain attributes, and moving to a different way of being in the world. So one of the first critiques is that the hero's journey implies a solo journey. And the evolution of us as a species of human beings is away from the idea that we have to make a solo journey to a more collaborative, participative style of moving through the world, that we're actually better together and we need each other and we're social beings and we have to learn how to connect and how to be in relationship. So, which is a little bit opposite of the implication that this must be a solo journey. Number two is the idea that that you are chosen, the idea of a chosen one, and particularly, and we're going to consider this idea as it relates to leadership, that that rather than being chosen, we kind of need to choose ourselves. So, and certainly if you're familiar with other models of emotional intelligence, choose yourself is one of the critical and key component parts of the 6 seconds model of emotional intelligence. So rather than being chosen by someone else or something else, we need to choose ourselves. We need to make the decision to lead our own lives. And so this is somewhat in contradiction to that. Next, this idea of crossing the threshold, that there is that there's some sort of threshold to cross over, and And again, depending on what your thoughts are about this, this could be limiting, because we could be looking for, well, where is that threshold, and what is the threshold, and where are we crossing over from and to? Certainly, you can think of the metaphoric crossing of various things, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that idea of metaphorical crossing of thresholds. It's just that if we're looking for where those thresholds are, we may not find them. Finally, or not finally, but point number 4 is the idea of seizing the force. This implies or suggests or encourages the accumulation of power, when in fact we're evolving away from the accumulation of power to the redistribution of power. We're moving away from command and control leadership, which is all about seizing power and grabbing onto power, and we're moving towards redistributing the power and empowering others. So again, this really could be, if we hold on to that idea of seizing the force, then we may overlook the opportunity to empower others. Finally, this idea of returning with the elixir. It's a really nice idea, coming back, to, we go away from our organization, maybe we go to a conference and we learn some big new idea, and we come back with the magic bullet or the magic potion that's going to change everything. And really, the problem with that is that we could be, in fact, looking for the magic bullet, or the silver bullet, or the magic elixir, when really we have to understand more about the processes that we involve ourselves in, the journey of learning to develop our emotional intelligence skills and competencies, so that we can have deep conversations, that we understand more about the courage to be vulnerable, which leads to connection, which leads to the collaboration that we're evolving towards, rather than searching for some sort of magic answer. It just is very unlikely to be the case that there is some one thing that is going to solve all of our issues and challenges. So what does this have to do with emotional intelligence? Well, as many of you know, our model of emotional intelligence, the one that we use, relates with 15 different emotional skills and competencies that help us to understand more about human behavior, why we are effective, why we may not be as effective as we'd like to be in certain situations, and they really make up a foundation for every other human skill. So once we attend to our foundation and look at what our foundation has to offer by the way of strengths, and those areas that are a little bit weaker that we should probably address and look at and understand how to improve, so we have a more solid foundation, it's always useful and helpful to go through this process. As many of you know, we use the Emotional Quotient Inventory, the world's first scientifically validated assessment for emotional intelligence, which was first published in 1997 and has undergone extensive research and improvements over time to result in the present day EQI 2.0 and the accompanying variation, which is a multi-rater version called the EQ 360. We use this extensively in the development of senior leaders in organizations all over the world, both private and public sector, government, healthcare, post-secondary, governments at all levels, right from tiny municipalities to large federal governments of our own country, which is Canada, and other countries. And our most interesting project was designing an emotional intelligence skills development course for the Republic of Botswana, which consisted of 20 days of intensive deep dive into these 15 areas. So this is our model, and now we want to look at it in light of what we've just talked about, where there may in fact be some leadership strengths that come from the idea of the hero's journey and the idea of the hero. So let's look at what those are. Those could potentially be, potential EQ advantages here could be self-regard. because you have to have a certain level of self-regard. You have to view yourself as competent and confident and worthy and deserving of taking the lead, of taking leadership, making the leadership decision to step up and do what's necessary, face the challenges in your life and in your organization. So this we talk about in terms of how you regard yourself. Assertiveness, incredibly important for leadership, to be able to confront substandard behavior, substandard performance, to be able to say that is not okay. And this is what we believe in. This is the direction that we're going. So assertiveness is incredibly important. And now another potential EQ advantage is independence, to be able to do things without a dependence on others, and to be able to take input from others, but ultimately to make the decision on your own, independently, which is inherent in the leadership journey, and also a potential EQ advantage for leadership. Then there's problem solving. Problem solving in terms of our EQ model has to do with the idea that the cognitive part of our brain, that is the logical and rational part of our brain, responsible for executive functioning, and which is really the intelligence part, functions in direct concert with the emotional parts of our brain. So there's never a point where those two parts of our brain operate independently of each other. And so problem solving by its very nature is full of emotions. Things like getting stuck while problem solving, feeling overwhelmed, deciding to put off problem solving for another day, procrastination. All of these are the emotional aspects of problem solving. Understanding that there is an optimal emotional state for every problem-solving situation is also critical and important. So you could be very good at problem solving, moving through problems rapidly, effectively, efficiently, etc. But the important thing is that you take into account the emotions. Stress tolerance is being able to, of course, tolerate and withstand stressful and challenging situations and circumstances. Now, all of these are potential EQ advantages, but there is an assumption that I want to challenge, and that is that scoring high on the EQI in these various areas is always good. And that is not necessarily the case, because someone who is high in self-regard could also be seen as arrogant or better than others, which of course is off-putting. Someone could be overly assertive and not paying proper attention to how their assertiveness is affecting others. Someone could be so independent that they're off doing their own thing. And certainly these become weaknesses. And so all of these potential EQ advantages could, if over-relied on or overused, could become weaknesses. So let's look at what we mean by where are the opportunities. Now, I show this picture of Sylvester Stallone as Rambo because he kind of is an archetype for the hero, a hero in a modern day hero's journey, and often one of the types of individuals that we look to in terms of role models for being a hero, and where this individual could in fact really have EQ deficits would be around emotional self-awareness and emotional expression, that is being in tune and in touch with your emotions and being able to express those in a way that leads to better connection with others, which is number 3, which is specifically having a quality of interpersonal relationships, having a relationships characterized by trust and intimacy, etc., where we're deeply connected and we have each other's backs. Number 4 is empathy, where, again, if you are assertive and you're not looking out for how that could be landing on other people, that could be real trouble. And of course, there is this element of social responsibility within the hero's journey, but there is also this kind of egocentrism involved in the hero's journey. And so in order to understand and realize that we're social beings and we have a responsibility for others, we have to be able to set aside our ego and not allow that to get in the way. So it's not so much about us, but it is about us and others. and our relationship with others and what we have to contribute. And then finally, if you think about the hero's journey and impulse control and some of the movies and, coming to bridges that are on fire and immediately scurrying across the bridge and getting to the other side before it burns through and before you fall into a deep canyon, we have to have a level of patience and with the process and be able to control those impulses. Otherwise, again, haste absolutely does make waste. So these are some of the areas that we would want to really look at and understand in people who have the potential for the hero's journey. Again, nothing inherently wrong with the hero's journey. It's just that we want to update it. We want to include this idea of that these are people that have more emotional self-awareness, more ability to express emotions, develop relationships, watch out for others, see what they have to contribute to others, and they have a level of patience that doesn't get them into trouble. Okay, so some potential barriers to leadership, and I'm excited about talking about this today because I'm speaking tomorrow to a CEO forum. And we're going to be talking about these things, founders syndrome, how founders of organizations tend to possibly stick around too long, not unable to let go of control or delegate authority to others so that they're able to do what they've been hired to do. A bit of a decreased capacity building. If you're the hero, then why would you develop other heroes? Again, we see the role of ego in the hero, sort of the traditional hero, and the modern day hero needs to set aside that ego and look to developing the capacity of others. There has traditionally been a tendency toward a lack of humility in some more traditional heroes, and unfortunately that isolates heroes and causes them to not be interested in capacity building, or being open to learning, or open to alternative ways of doing things, open to new ideas. So we need to see that flexibility and that openness, which is difficult when we see a lack of humility. A lack of transparency, which again, if you're the hero, then why would you share all the information that you have in your possession or you have privilege to be part of? Because wouldn't you be losing control? So when we see lack of transparency, we see lower trust. Lower trust from the leader in others, and certainly we're saying to people, listen, not only do I not trust you, but you are not part of this organization, this valuable. You're not a valuable team member that we sometimes see is unwittingly communicated by a lack of transparency. Power hoarding is sometimes common. Again, we want to look at how we can empower others for greater collaboration and greater synergy in working together. Again, traditionally, when we look at a hero leader, there's one-way communication, which is highly correlated with command and control leadership, but is also highly correlated with dialogue, with learning, with effective managing of conflict, etc. And we see an overemphasis on self-interest with the hero leader, and we want to move away from the self-interest more to the interests of the organization, to our shared interests, to the interest of the team, etc. So those are some of the potential barriers to leadership. Potential solutions are improving and increasing self-regard coupled with humility. So to say, yes, you are worthy and deserving. You should be competent and feel confident to address your leadership challenges, but also know that no one individual should be expected to handle it all. You are open and willing to learn and consider alternative paths and strategies. Empathy for others, knowing that not everyone experiences the world the way you do, which is one of the wonderful things about personality type indicators, to show that, you know, what's not stressful for you and is an environment that you're drawn to might be terribly stressful and challenging for others. And so we need to use our empathy skills to understand that we all experience the world in different ways. Improve emotional self-awareness and emotional expression through various activities that we use in our workshops and in coaching with senior leaders to talk about how you can be more emotionally self-aware and in tune, etc. Finally, focus on relationships. Relationships are everything. Nothing ever done, nothing great ever accomplished in the history of the world was ever done alone. It's always through relationships with others. And social responsibility, that we are all part of this great big social fabric, whether we're in an organization, on a team, part of a community, part of a family, or simply on the planet. All right, so quick summary, and then we'll move to questions. Leadership has been influenced by the idea of the hero throughout history. And that is my not very subtle way of implying that there has been this overemphasis on masculinity. And certainly we've seen the idea of toxic masculinity and how it prevents relationships and prevents collaborative leadership and prevents us from working together effectively by its overemphasis on command and control leadership. And so we need to change that. We need to shift it. We need to become aware of it first. There is a potential to idealize the singular effort and again to hang on to power in the hero, in the traditional hero and the hero's journey. And this contradicts the need for collaboration and empowerment. And we need to look to EQ competencies to pave the way to better relationships characterized by trust, loyalty, commitment, and clear communication. And with this new collaborative way of working, we need these new skills. In the old command and control leadership, it did not involve a lot of skills other than being able to tell people what to do. This way involves dialogue and the creation and the understanding of how to build trust. And of course, relationships characterized by loyalty, commitment, and clear communication. All right, so love to open it up now for questions and comments. And so I'm going to take a look and move to the chat box. Oh, we've got someone who is talking about not having audio, and I'm just hoping that that is not the case for everyone else. That would be really terrible if that was the case. And just wondering about whether we've got the ability to take questions here. Yes, please. Please type in your questions here. One of the questions that we frequently get is, what if my manager, my leader, is desperately clinging to a more command and control style of leadership, is unwilling to consider other styles of leadership, and just what is my role in that case? And I guess my answer for that is that, you know, what I suggest to everyone in that situation is to form the business case for switching to a more collaborative style. And of course, it's done in little baby steps. You're not going to experience, or you're unlikely to experience, transformation. However, you can draw your manager or your leader's attention to perhaps some of the benefits of more dialogue in the workplace, of having more input of others. Possibly it is because we human beings at a most basic level move away from pain and towards pleasure, maybe talk about what some of the pain points are. What is the pain point of keeping things the way they are, of maintaining the status quo, and what are the benefits of developing the skills to enter into deeper, more meaningful conversations with others. So, so that is one of the solutions to that situation. We have another question. Thank you very much for this one. It's, do you find participants in your training in denial, that they, and in some cases that they believe they have empathy, and how do you address that? And that's a good question, and it's an interesting question. It's I'll answer. It's a two-part question. So the first part is, do you find participants in your training that are in denial? Well, we as a society are in denial about emotions. You know, we are taught, if we listen to the messages that come from popular culture and the media that we see on TVs, in movies and on TV, we're taught to avoid and deny emotions in general. That to pay attention to emotions is not a good thing. In some cases, it's a self-indulgent thing, and in many cases, it takes us away from our focus on our goals. What we need to switch to and transition to, rather, is this understanding that much more of everything we do is based in and surrounded by emotions. So first of all, we need to start there. And so while we do find that some participants in training are in denial, I kind of assume that everyone is in denial at first. So I know that part of my role in training and in workshops is to start out by talking about the importance of emotions. And we do that by showing a humorous video, which demonstrates the stress that is involved and the demands that are placed on people in the workplace. Then we talk about the fact that that part of why we need to pay attention to emotions in the workplace, because if we don't, then we could be taken out by stress. We need stress in order to function, of course. However, too much stress, and we feel, first of all, fatigue, and then we approach burnout. We don't want that, and so that's certainly one part. Another part is that many technical people are drawn to technical, analytical work because it is more solitary and less social. However, they find that they have to work in teams. And so we have many people who maybe would prefer to work alone, but now they find that the workplace requires teams, and it requires communication and conversations and addressing conflict and managing conflict well in order to grow and to develop. And so that's certainly another aspect of emotional intelligence. And finally, some of the things that we track and that we measure are related to things like employee engagement, things like customer satisfaction or customer service indices, all of which are about how people feel. If they're not feeling great about being in the organization, then of course they will rate their engagement as low, and customers will not get the kind of service or the kind of treatment that they want, or certainly will not rate the customer service well. And this situation where people believe they have empathy, this is a more challenging question. How do you address that? And the way to address it is when you feel that people aren't paying attention to how you're feeling or aren't interested in how you're feeling, and then learning how to communicate in such a way as to increase the likelihood that you will be heard by others when you tell them that you feel like at times they're not interested or concerned in how you're feeling. And why that's important to be able to teach people how you operate emotionally. And these are skills and knowledge that we focus on in our workshops and in our training sessions. And so we really need people to learn how to bring up difficult subjects and difficult conversations and deal with difficult people in ways that lead to improving the relationship and not harming the relationship. So, so that's that piece there. Then we've got another question, which is about not that feelings and emotions are not necessarily an indication of the truth or reality of a situation. They're important to notice and pay attention, but not necessarily automatically be believed as an indication of the truth of a situation. Thoughts? Yeah, it's a great idea, and again, this speaks to the fact that we understand emotions poorly in our society, and we really need to have a more realistic, training, grounding in emotions, and the fact that emotions are responses to stimuli in our environment. And you're right, they're not necessarily the truth or reality of a situation, but it is very important to notice and pay attention to, because it could be an individual's reality that's different from our own. So it could be that again, in response to something that may not be necessarily stressful or challenging or difficult for us as leaders, might be very stressful, challenging, and difficult for others. And so we need to understand more about emotions so that we pay attention to that and know and understand that. But this idea that emotions are not necessarily truth or reality of a situation, that has some truth as well. And the truth there is that it's not an event or a situation or a circumstance that carries emotions with it. It's not like everyone experiences those situations or those events, those triggers or those stimuli in the same way. It's about the fact that everybody will experience that differently depending on what they believe and how they think about that stimulus in their environment. Where I would only beg to differ slightly is that for that individual, that is their truth. How they feel about that event is true for them, and it is informing them about their response to that situation or event. And it's important for us to understand those things about ourselves and how we operate emotionally, to understand whether we're in the optimal emotional state to address a situation or circumstance, whether we need to deal with that emotion in another way. All emotions, it seems, get expressed either verbally or through our actions or behavior. So are our emotions being expressed in the most effective way given the circumstances or the situation? And so that's going to be important as well. Well, considering that that we don't have any more questions at this time, I'm going to invite you to email other questions that you may have. Oh, here's a question that I might be able to answer quickly. How do you help participants appreciate that another person's experience with a stimulus doesn't fall into a black and white situation? And the conclusion that you could incorrectly come to is that their response is wrong. Absolutely. It happens frequently with senior leaders that they think everyone else should be like them. It's a bit of a stereotype, but again, it relates to the hero's journey, that they think everyone should be as heroic or brave as they are about facing the situation, don't understand that everybody experiences things differently. So I guess that would require some education, would be the response to that question. How do you help someone appreciate another person's experience is their own experience and doesn't necessarily fall into a black and white situation? There are many shades of gray with respect to emotional responses, and someone could be, oh, here's another comment on this same situation. I've been scared, jealous, or angry with someone or something, only later to find that my feelings were not accurate for the truth of the situation. Absolutely. Yes. Again, we have our emotions because of what we believe to be true or what we think about that stimulus or that situation or circumstances. And our response is our response. That's true for us. Our emotions are true. It's a true response for us. But then we can always become more aware of which beliefs and assumptions that we had about that situation led to the emotions that we had. So again, it's about creating awareness through imparting knowledge and just learning more about emotions and how they affect us. So thanks very much for all of those. I'm going to go to our closing screen here and just say, so thank you so much for joining us today. Please check out our website for further information, which is simply eitrainingcompany.com. And then please consider our certification courses. If you are a professional who works with others, who wants to learn how to use the tools that are required in order to implement EQ programs, to assess EQ, please consider EQI certification. Go to our website and see all of our upcoming dates and cities. Our next Leading with EI courses, it's always the third day following certification where you learn how to deliver a one-day workshop. We've got a special course called The Heart and Science of Leadership for Women. You can check our website for dates coming up with respect to those courses. And we've got an online course called Writing for Emotional Intelligence. At a very low cost, you can begin to learn more about your own emotional operating system and become more intelligent about your own emotions. If you want to take the EQI or the EQ360, let us know. We can certainly provide more information about that. And finally, we love to come in and create custom in-house courses and design executive retreats, etc., for organizations. So contact us to talk about that. Thank you so much, and have a great day, and we'll see you on our next free webinar. Bye for now.